The entire plane falls silent as Zara Washington stands at the entrance of the cabin, her phone still clutched in her hand. "That's right," she says, her voice unwavering despite the tears threatening to spill. "The man you just called, unqualified to fly this plane. He's my father. And he's about to decide whether you still have a job tomorrow." Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you enjoy real stories about standing up against discrimination, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful content just like this. Now let's find out how Zara ended up in this tense confrontation at 3,000 feet. Zara Washington woke with a start as her alarm blared through her bedroom. It was 5:00 a.m., and today marked a significant milestone, her first solo flight from Atlanta to New York. At 17, most of her friends would be nervous about traveling alone, but Zara's anxiety stemmed from a different place. As the daughter of Robert Washington, one of the few black chief pilots at Atlantic Airlines, she had grown up around planes, but had developed an irrational fear of flying after a particularly turbulent flight when she was 9. Sitting up in bed, she gazed at the model, Boeing 777, on her desk, a gift from her father on her 16th birthday. That model represented more than just an airplane. It symbolized her father's journey from an airline mechanic to becoming one of the most respected pilots in the industry. Despite facing systemic barriers and racism throughout his career, Robert had persevered, earning his position through exceptional skill and determination. "You packed everything." Her mother, Danielle, appeared at the doorway, already dressed for her shift at the hospital where she worked as a cardiology nurse. "Triple checked last night," Zara replied, slipping out of bed. "Dad's family benefits make this trip possible. First-class tickets would have cost a fortune otherwise." Danielle nodded, her expression turning serious. "You know the drill, baby. You might face some questions. Keep your boarding pass ready and your ID visible. And remember what we've always taught you. Handle racism with dignity, but never silence," Zara recited. These words had become something of a family mantra, a necessary survival skill for a black family in America. Zara pulled out her phone and checked for messages. There was one from her father sent at 3 a.m. "Change of plans. Not flying your return trip. I'm captaining your outbound flight today. Don't tell Mom I swapped shifts to surprise you both. See you in the friendly skies. Love you, Pilot Dad." Excitement bubbled up inside her. Her father would be flying the plane today. She quickly texted her best friend, Amara. "Oh my God. You won't believe this. Dad's actually flying my plane today." Amara responded instantly. "No way. That's awesome. But also pressure much. Like, what if you embarrass yourself and he has to make a dad announcement over the PA system?" Zara laughed out loud. Robert had always been her hero, but she'd never admit that to him. Growing up, watching him navigate a world that often tried to diminish him had shaped her own determination. When she was younger, she'd struggled with debilitating anxiety about flying, the one thing that connected her most to her father. Robert had spent countless evenings helping her understand the physics of flight, the multiple safety systems, and the rigorous training pilots underwent. His patience and knowledge had gradually replaced her fear with fascination. While preparing breakfast, Zara's mind drifted to her father's pre-flight ritual. Before every takeoff, he would call each family member. "Just checking in before we head up," he would say, never acknowledging the real reason behind those calls, the statistical dangers of his profession, and the peace of mind the ritual gave them all. By 6:30 a.m., Zara was double-checking her carry-on. Inside was her acceptance letter to MIT's summer engineering program. With dreams of becoming an aerospace engineer, she had worked tirelessly to maintain her 4.2 gigapascals while participating in robotics competitions and volunteering at the local aviation museum. The museum's director, a former Tuskegee airman, had written one of her recommendation letters. "You sure you don't want me to drive you?" Danielle asked, car keys dangling from her fingers. "Mom, I've got this." "The rideshare is already scheduled," Zara insisted, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. This trip represented a step toward independence, something she craved yet approached with trepidation. As the rideshare pulled away from their suburban Atlanta home, Zara gazed at the framed family photo she'd snapped with her phone before leaving. It showed Robert in his captain's uniform, his arm around Danielle with Zara between them at her 16th birthday celebration. The Washington family standing tall and proud, despite a world that often tried to push them down. Little did she know that today would test every lesson her parents had taught her about dignity, courage, and standing up for herself in a world that wasn't always fair or kind. Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport hummed with early morning activity as Zara joined the security line. Business travelers clutched coffee cups, while families corralled sleepy children. Zara kept her boarding pass and ID ready, just as her parents had always instructed. The employee family boarding pass clearly displayed her first-class seat assignment, a perk of her father's position that still felt novel despite their occasional use of it. When Zara reached the TSA checkpoint, she was directed to a lane operated by Agent Wade Sullivan, a middle-aged white man with thinning hair and a permanent scowl. She handed over her documents with a polite smile. Sullivan's eyebrows rose as he examined her first-class boarding pass. His gaze shifted between her face and her ID multiple times, as if trying to detect a forgery. Employee family member, he questioned his tone, implying suspicion. "Yes, sir. My father works for Atlantic Airlines." Zara replied, evenly maintaining eye contact despite her growing discomfort. Sullivan held up her boarding pass. "And how exactly did you get a first-class ticket? These are usually reserved for paying customers." Zara felt her cheeks warm but kept her voice steady. "It's one of the benefits for family members of airline employees. My father is a pilot with the airline." Sullivan smirked. "A pilot, huh?" With Atlantic, his emphasis made the question sound like an accusation. "Yes, sir." "For 20 years now," Zara replied, noticing how the white businessman behind her had been waved through the pre-check lane with barely a glance at his documentation. "I'm going to need to verify this. Step aside." Sullivan motioned to a small area adjacent to the checkpoint. "Is there a problem with my ID?" Zara asked, conscious of the growing line behind her. "Just standard procedure," Sullivan replied, though Zara noticed he hadn't subjected any other passengers to this standard procedure. A white woman in her 40s with shoulder-length blonde hair, Beverly Klein, according to her visible company badge, stood nearby, watching the interaction with a furrowed brow. Their eyes met briefly before Beverly looked away, her discomfort evident. Sullivan rifled through Zara's carry-on bag, removing items and examining them unnecessarily. He pulled out her MIT acceptance letter. "MIT? Huh? Engineering program." His tone suggested disbelief. "Yes, their summer aerospace program," Zara confirmed, fighting to keep her voice neutral as he handled her belongings with less care than she would have liked. "That's quite competitive," he remarked, the implication hanging in the air that she couldn't possibly have earned her spot legitimately. After what felt like an eternity but was actually 7 minutes, Sullivan grudgingly returned her documents. "You're cleared to proceed." As Zara repacked her now disorganized bag, he added under his breath, "Some people sure know how to work the system." The comment stung, but Zara kept her composure until she cleared security. Once at her gate, she called Amara, finding a quiet corner to vent. "I swear, Amara, he practically accused me of stealing the boarding pass," she whispered furiously into her phone. Meanwhile, white passengers just breezed through like it was nothing. "Did you say anything?" Amara asked. "What could I say? You know how these situations go. If I'd protested, I'd be the angry black girl causing trouble." Zara sighed, watching as passengers began gathering for boarding. At the gate, Zara noticed a flight attendant, Heather Reynolds, according to her name tag, watching her with subtle scrutiny. Heather, a thin white woman with perfectly styled brown hair, seemed to pay particular attention when Zara took a seat in the pre-boarding area designated for first-class passengers. Zara tried to focus on the excitement of surprising her father. He didn't know that she knew he would be flying the plane today, and she imagined the look on his face when he saw her boarding. This thought helped push aside the humiliation of the security check and the uncomfortable scrutiny she continued to feel from the flight attendant. As boarding time approached, Zara texted her mother, "At the gate, all good. Love you." She didn't mention the security incident. No need to worry her mom, who already carried enough concerns about her black daughter navigating the world alone. The gate agent announced pre-boarding for passengers with disabilities and families with young children, followed by first-class boarding. Zara gathered her belongings, unaware that her airport troubles were far from over. Now boarding our first-class passengers for Atlantic Airlines Flight 1382 to LaGuardia, the gate agent announced as Zara joined the priority boarding line. She held her boarding pass ready, determined to board smoothly despite the lingering unease from her security experience. Heather Reynolds stood at the entrance to the jet bridge, scanning boarding passes and offering practice smiles to first-class passengers. When Zara approached, the flight attendant's smile noticeably faltered. "Boarding pass, please, Heather," requested, her tone markedly different than it had been with previous passengers. Zara handed over her digital boarding pass. Heather examined it with exaggerated scrutiny, swiping through the information multiple times. "This is a first-class seat," Heather stated, as though Zara might have been confused about her own boarding pass. "Yes, I know," Zara replied politely. "My father works for the airline." Heather's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. "Employee family member. In first class." "Yes, it's part of his benefits package," Zara explained, increasingly aware of the line forming behind her and the impatient sighs from other passengers. A tall white man in an expensive suit, Clayton Whitfield, according to the luggage tag visible on his briefcase, stepped forward from behind Zara. "Is there a problem here? Some of us have connections to make." "No problem, sir," Heather assured him quickly, "just verifying this young lady's boarding pass." "Well, could you verify it?" While the rest of us board, Whitfield pressed his tone condescending as he glanced dismissively at Zara. "Of course, sir. Please go ahead." Heather moved aside to let Whitfield pass while still holding Zara's boarding pass. "I'll just need to confirm this with the gate agent." Zara felt her face grow hot as other first-class passengers were allowed to board while she remained held up at the entrance. The gate agent, Richard Owens, approached with an annoyed expression. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked Heather. "This young woman is trying to board first class with an employee family member pass." "I'm not sure if that's allowed," Heather explained, despite the fact that the boarding pass had scanned properly in her system. "It absolutely is allowed," Zara interjected firmly. "My father is a pilot with Atlantic. Family first-class benefits are part of his employment package." Richard examined the boarding pass. "The system accepted it, Heather. If there was an issue, it would have flagged automatically." From inside the plane, Clayton Whitfield had returned to the boarding area. "Is she going to be sitting in first class?" "Next to me." The displeasure in his voice was unmistakable. "Sir, all passengers with valid first-class boarding passes are entitled to sit in their assigned seats," Richard explained professionally, though Zara noticed he didn't defend her directly. "Look, I paid over $2,000 for my seat. I don't think it's appropriate to have these family passes taking up premium space that paying customers should get," Whitfield argued loudly enough for other passengers to hear. Beverly Klein, the woman from security, stood nearby with her boarding pass for economy class, watching the situation unfold with increasing discomfort. Heather lowered her voice. "Perhaps we could find you a nice seat in economy to avoid any unpleasantness." She directed this suggestion at Zara, not Whitfield. "No, thank you," Zara responded firmly. I'll take my assigned seat, as indicated on my valid boarding pass. Whitfield scoffed. This is ridiculous. This is why this airline is going downhill. No standards anymore. Zara felt her phone vibrate in her pocket, her father's pre-flight call right on schedule. She couldn't answer, not in the middle of this confrontation. I need to verify your documentation one more time. Heather insisted, stepping aside to make a call while Zara was forced to wait. The situation was drawing attention from more passengers. Some looked embarrassed by the scene. Others seemed to agree with Whitfield, and a few appeared concerned for Zara. I don't understand why this is even a discussion, Whitfield continued, raising his voice. These airlines are so concerned about appearing diverse that they're giving away premium seats now. What's next? Letting just anyone fly the planes too. Zara's phone vibrated again, her father calling a second time, which was unusual. He must be concerned about why she hadn't answered. The confrontation had escalated beyond a simple boarding issue into something much uglier, with racial undertones becoming increasingly explicit. Zara stood her ground, determined not to give up her rightful seat, but also feeling increasingly isolated as no other passengers came to her defense. While we sort this out, please stand aside. Heather directed Zara toward the wall of the jet bridge, away from the flow of boarding passengers. The humiliation burned through Zara as people filed past, some openly staring, others deliberately avoiding eye contact. Clayton Whitfield had taken his seat but continued making his displeasure known to anyone within earshot. This would never happen on Delta, he proclaimed loudly. They maintain standards. Atlantic's been going downhill ever since they started that diversity hiring program. Zara's phone vibrated for a third time. Her father never called more than twice unless something was wrong. She glanced at Heather, who was still on the phone with someone from customer service. I need to take this call, Zara informed her. It's important. Heather gave a dismissive wave, turning her back to continue her conversation while Zara answered her phone. Dad, Zara's voice was barely above a whisper. Zara, I was getting worried. Is everything okay? Robert Washington's deep, calm voice came through the line. You always pick up on the second call. Zara hesitated, not wanting to worry him before his flight. I'm having some issues boarding. What kind of issues? His tone shifted to concern. From inside the cabin, Whitfield's voice carried out to the jet bridge. These diversity programs are all about appearances, not qualifications. You think I want some unqualified pilot flying this plane just because the airline needed to fill a quota? Next thing you know, we'll be nosediving because someone couldn't handle the job, but got it anyway. Several passengers laughed uncomfortably while others nodded in agreement. Beverly Klein, now boarding with economy class, paused at the entrance to the jet bridge. Her expression troubled as she overheard Whitfield's comments. The tears Zara had been fighting finally spilled over. Dad, they're questioning my boarding pass. The flight attendant implied I shouldn't be in first class, and there's this passenger saying horrible things about diversity hires, being unqualified pilots, and which flight attendant Robert's voice was now controlled in a way Zara recognized the same tone he used when navigating severe turbulence. Heather Reynolds Zara replied, watching as the flight attendant's head snapped up at the sound of her name. Put her on the phone, please, Robert requested calmly. Zara held out her phone to Heather. My father would like to speak with you. I'm in the middle of resolving this situation, Heather replied dismissively. I don't have time to speak with your father. You should make time, Zara insisted, her voice stronger now. My father is Robert Washington, the chief pilot for this flight. Heather's expression transformed from dismissive to shocked in an instant. She reached for the phone with suddenly trembling hands. Hello, she stammered. Zara couldn't hear what her father was saying, but she watched as Heather's face paled. The flight attendant's eyes darted toward the cockpit door at the front of the plane, then back to Zara. Yes, Captain Washington, I understand. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. Heather handed the phone back to Zara, her entire demeanor transformed. The scene had attracted attention from everyone in the first-class cabin. Whitfield, who had been holding court with his discriminatory comments, was now watching the interaction with growing awareness. This was the moment. Standing at the entrance to the cabin with her phone still clutched in her hand, Zara felt something shift inside her. Years of swallowing microaggressions, of taking the high road, of explaining and excusing it, all culminated in this moment of clarity. "That's right," she said, her voice unwavering despite the tears threatening to spill. "The man you just called unqualified to fly this plane, he's my father, and he's about to decide whether you still have a job tomorrow." The entire plane fell silent. Was Zara right to stand up for herself and her father in this situation? Comment 1 if you think she handled it perfectly, or 2 if you believe there was a better way to address the discrimination. This is why we need to have these conversations. Racism doesn't always come with a warning sign. Like and subscribe if you want to see more stories about standing up against discrimination in everyday life. But what happens next? How does Captain Washington handle this delicate situation while maintaining his professionalism? And what about Clayton Whitfield, who suddenly realizes the diversity hire he was disparaging is actually in command of the aircraft he's about to fly in? Let's continue with this powerful story. The silence that followed Zara's revelation was deafening. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and those who had nodded along with Clayton Whitfield's racist comments suddenly became intensely interested in their phones or the safety cards in their seat pockets. Heather Reynolds stood frozen, her professional demeanor crumbling as the reality of the situation sank in. I didn't realize. I was just following procedure and—" "No, you weren't," Zara replied quietly but firmly. "My boarding pass scanned correctly. There was no procedure that required you to question its validity or suggest I move to economy." Whitfield, realizing his precarious position, attempted to backpedal. "Now wait just a minute. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I wasn't referring to your father specifically. I was making a general observation about industry standards." Before Zara could respond, the cockpit door opened. Captain Robert Washington emerged in his full uniform, 4 stripes on his shoulders, captain's hat tucked under his arm, and the quiet authority that had defined his 20-year career. At 6'2" with salt and pepper hair at his temples, his presence commanded immediate respect. The cabin fell even more silent, if that was possible. Robert's eyes immediately found Zara noting the tear tracks on her cheeks despite her composed expression. Something flickered in his gaze, a mixture of parental concern and professional determination. "Miss Reynolds," he addressed Heather with formal professionalism, "may I speak with you for a moment?" "Yes," Captain Heather responded, her voice barely audible. Robert turned to Richard Owens, who had followed the commotion onto the plane. "Mr. Owens, I'd like you to join us as well." His tone was not angry, but carried unmistakable authority. As they stepped to the galley for a private conversation, the first officer appeared at the cockpit door. "Everything okay, Captain?" he asked, eyeing the unusual scene. "We're handling a situation, James. I'll brief you shortly," Robert assured him, before turning back to the flight attendant and gate agent. Though they spoke in hushed tones, the front rows of first class could hear snippets of the conversation. "Completely unacceptable treatment. Atlantic Airlines' non-discrimination policy clearly states, my daughter was humiliated in front of an entire aircraft." Clayton Whitfield fidgeted in his seat, then stood abruptly. "Captain, if I could have a word." "Sir, please return to your seat," Robert responded without looking at him. "I'll address passenger concerns once I've finished with my crew." The dismissal was polite but firm, leaving Whitfield no choice but to sit back down. His face flushed with embarrassment or anger, possibly both. Just then, airline manager Harold Thompson hurried onto the plane. in his late 50s with a receding hairline and perpetually worried expression. Thompson had been summoned by an alert from Richard. Captain Washington Thompson began. I was informed there's a situation that might delay departure. Indeed, there is, Robert confirmed. My daughter was racially profiled by your gate staff and then subjected to discriminatory comments from a passenger, all while your flight attendant suggested she surrender her legitimately assigned first-class seat. Thompson's eyes widened. Your daughter. Before the conversation could continue, Beverly Klein stepped forward from economy. Excuse me, Captain. My name is Beverly Klein. I witnessed what happened both at security and during boarding. If it helps, I'm willing to provide a statement about what I saw. Robert nodded appreciatively. Thank you, Miss Klein. That would be helpful. Turning back to Harold Thompson, Robert lowered his voice. As captain, I have authority over who flies on my aircraft. Mr. Whitfield in seat 3 Amperes has demonstrated behavior that I consider disruptive to the safety and comfort of other passengers. I'm requesting his removal from this flight. Thompson's face contorted with anxiety. Captain Mr. Whitfield is a Platinum Elite member. Perhaps we could. His status doesn't exempt him from our code of conduct, Robert stated firmly. But before I make that final decision, I need a moment with my daughter. As Robert and Zara stepped aside, other passengers began to process what was happening. A young woman in row 4 raised her hand tentatively. I recorded part of what Mr. Whitfield said on my phone. It was really inappropriate. An older black businessman nodded. I heard it too. Completely unacceptable. The atmosphere in the cabin was transforming. Those who had remained silent during Zara's ordeal were finding their voices perhaps motivated by shame or a belated desire to do the right thing. Meanwhile, Clayton Whitfield sat rigid in his seat. His earlier confidence evaporated as he realized that the unqualified diversity hire he had disparaged was not only the captain of his flight, but had the authority to remove him from the plane entirely. At the rear of first class, unnoticed by most passengers amid the commotion, a man in a casual button-down shirt and jeans watched the proceedings with intense interest, occasionally making notes on his phone. The discreet Atlantic Airline CEO pin on his collar was visible only if one looked carefully. The power dynamics had shifted dramatically in a matter of minutes. The people who had held authority over Zara Heather with her ability to question her boarding pass Whitfield with his privileged passenger status now found themselves answerable to her father, whose position they had never considered when making their discriminatory assumptions. For Zara, the vindication was complicated by concern for her father. She knew that despite his calm exterior, navigating this situation as both a parent and a captain was taking an emotional toll. She also knew that whatever happened next would set a precedent not just for her, but potentially for other people of color who faced similar discrimination when traveling. Robert guided Zara toward the empty galley area near the cockpit, creating a small bubble of privacy amidst the tense atmosphere. For a moment, neither spoke. Robert studied his daughter's face, noting the emotional exhaustion behind her composed expression. Are you okay? He finally asked, his captain's voice giving way to his father's concern. Zara nodded, then shook her head, then shrugged a series of contradictory movements that conveyed the complexity of her feelings better than words could. I'm sorry this happened to you, Robert said quietly. And I'm sorry I wasn't there when it started. It's not your fault, Dad, Zara replied, finally finding her voice. Besides, I'm 17. I need to learn to handle these situations on my own. Robert sighed, removing his captain's hat and running a hand over his close-cropped hair. Zara, you shouldn't have to handle racism at all. That's not a life skill any parent wants their child to need. The professional barrier Robert maintained between his personal life and his role as captain momentarily slipped. 20 years flying for this airline, over 15000 flight hours. And some businessman who knows nothing about aviation feels entitled to question my qualifications because of my race. He shook his head, a lifetime of similar experiences reflected in his eyes. "Has this happened to you a lot?" Zara asked softly. "Passengers doubting you because you're black?" "More times than I can count," Robert admitted. "Early in my career, passengers would sometimes request a different flight when they saw me in the cockpit. Flight attendants would double-check my credentials. Other pilots would explain basic procedures to me that I already knew." He smiled slightly. "My mentor, William Hayes, one of the first black commercial pilots in the country, told me something I never forgot. He said, 'Robert, you'll always have to be twice as good to be considered half as qualified. That's not fair, but that's reality. So be 3 times as good, and eventually they'll run out of excuses.'" Zara felt tears threatening again. "That's what you've always taught me. Excellence leaves no room for their excuses." "But excellence doesn't shield you from racism," Robert added gently, "and the burden of constantly proving yourself is exhausting." A memory surfaced in Zara's mind. "Remember when I was 9 and that flight attendant asked if you were really the pilot?" Robert nodded. "And you stood up and announced to the entire gate area that I had won the Airline Safety Excellence Award 3 years running." They both laughed softly at the recollection, the tension breaking momentarily. "I'm proud of how you handled yourself today," Robert said, placing his hands on her shoulders. "But I need you to know something important. My position as captain doesn't make racism disappear. What it does is give us a rare opportunity. Most black folks don't get the chance to hold people accountable for their discriminatory behavior." Zara's expression clouded. "I didn't mean to cause trouble for you, Dad. If this affects your career—" "Stop right there," Robert interrupted firmly. "You didn't cause anything. Their actions, their biases, their decisions, those are not your responsibility. Never blame yourself for other people's racism." He straightened his uniform jacket, his demeanor shifting subtly as he prepared to return to his professional role. "Now we need to decide how to proceed. As captain, I have several options. I can remove Mr. Whitfield from the flight for creating a hostile environment. I can file formal complaints against both TSA agent Sullivan and flight attendant Reynolds. Or we can document everything but allow the flight to proceed with all current passengers and crew." "What do you think we should do?" Zara asked. Robert shook his head. "This impacts you directly. I want your input." Zara considered the options carefully. Removing Whitfield might feel satisfying in the moment, but it also delays the flight for everyone else. She thought about the passengers who had remained silent during her ordeal and about Beverly Klein, who had finally found her voice. Maybe there's a teaching opportunity here for everyone involved. A look of pride crossed Robert's face. "That's mature thinking, Zara. Very captain-like, considering the entire operation, not just the immediate satisfaction." "I learned from the best," she replied with a small smile. Robert nodded, decision made. "Let's proceed with the flight. But we document everything, and we ensure there are consequences through the proper channels afterward. No free passes." As they prepared to rejoin the main cabin, Robert placed a gentle hand on Zara's arm. "You know your mother and I tried to protect you from these experiences for as long as we could. Maybe too long." "You can't protect me from racism," Dad, Zara said, with wisdom beyond her years. "But you and Mom taught me how to face it with dignity and courage. That's better than protection." Robert embraced his daughter briefly, then straightened his uniform and replaced his captain's hat. In an instant, he transformed back into Captain Washington, the consummate professional responsible for the safety and well-being of everyone aboard his aircraft. Together they returned to face the situation, both carrying the weight of their shared experience as Black Americans navigating a world that too often judged them not by their character or capabilities, but by the color of their skin. Captain Washington and Zara emerged from their private conversation to find the cabin atmosphere changed. Harold Thompson stood nervously near the galley, periodically checking his watch and casting worried glances toward the cockpit. Departure time was approaching, and the situation remained unresolved. Mr. Thompson Robert addressed the airline manager with professional calm. "I've made my decision regarding how we'll proceed." Before Thompson could respond, Clayton Whitfield rose from his seat. "Captain, I insist on speaking with whoever's really in charge here. This entire situation has been blown completely out of proportion." Robert fixed Whitfield with a level gaze. "Sir, on this aircraft I am in charge. That's not a diversity statement, that's federal aviation regulations." A few passengers suppressed smiles at the perfectly delivered response. Now, regarding this situation, Robert continued addressing Thompson while deliberately ignoring Whitfield's attempt to interject. "I want the following documented. My daughter experienced discriminatory treatment at TSA Checkpoint 4B by Agent Wade Sullivan, who subjected her to additional scrutiny not applied to other passengers. She was then further discriminated against by your flight attendant, Miss Reynolds, who questioned the validity of her properly issued employee family boarding pass. Finally, she was subjected to explicitly racist comments from Mr. Whitfield, who publicly questioned the qualifications of minority pilots, specifically suggesting they were hired to fill quotas rather than based on merit." Thompson frantically took notes on his tablet. "Captain, I assure you, we take these allegations very seriously." "These aren't allegations," Beverly Klein interrupted, stepping forward from economy. "I witnessed the TSA incident firsthand. Agent Sullivan was clearly targeting this young woman because of her race. He questioned her legitimate documentation, searched her belongings unnecessarily, and made snide comments about working the system. I'm ashamed to say I didn't speak up then, but I'm speaking up now." A TSA supervisor who had been summoned to the aircraft stood at the boarding door looking uncomfortable as Beverly described her colleague's behavior. "I also heard Mr. Whitfield's comments about diversity hires being unqualified," added a young woman from row 4 holding up her phone. "I have a recording if you need it." Whitfield's face flushed deep red. "You can't record me without my permission. That's illegal." "Actually, Sir," Thompson corrected him, "Georgia is a one-party consent state for recordings, and airline cabins are public spaces with no expectation of privacy." More passengers began speaking up. "I heard him too. He was being completely inappropriate. The flight attendant was definitely treating her differently than other first-class passengers." Harold Thompson looked increasingly distressed as the testimonies mounted. "Captain Washington, what would you like us to do to resolve this situation?" Robert considered the question carefully. First, Mr. Whitfield has a choice to make. He can either deplane voluntarily and take a later flight, or he can remain aboard with the understanding that any further discriminatory comments will result in his immediate removal and potential placement on Atlantic's no-fly list. Whitfield's expression shifted from indignation to calculation as he realized the precariousness of his position. I choose to remain aboard. I have important business in New York." "Very well," Robert acknowledged without emotion. "As for Miss Reynolds, I'll be filing a formal complaint regarding her handling of this situation. However, as flight safety is my primary concern and removing her would delay our departure significantly, she will remain as part of the crew today, provided she can perform her duties professionally." Heather nodded quickly, her earlier arrogance replaced by evident anxiety. "Yes, Captain, I understand." Finally, Robert concluded, "I expect Atlantic Airlines to conduct a thorough investigation into these incidents, including the TSA checkpoint interaction. My daughter will provide a detailed statement, as will I. Miss Klein has already offered her testimony, and I trust others will do the same." Thompson nodded vigorously. "Absolutely, Captain. We'll launch a full investigation immediately." Just as the situation appeared resolved, a man rose from his seat in the last row of first class, the one who had been quietly observing the entire episode. As he approached, Thompson's eyes widened in recognition. "Mr. Pearson," Thompson stammered, "I didn't realize you were aboard today." Evidently not, replied Marcus Pearson, the CEO of Atlantic Airlines. His expression was unreadable as he extended his hand to Robert. Captain Washington, I don't believe we've met personally, though. Your reputation precedes you. 15 safety commendations over 20 years, if I'm not mistaken. 16, Robert corrected politely, shaking the CEO's hand. The most recent was last month. Pearson nodded, then turned to Zara. Miss Washington, I want to personally apologize for your experience today. This is not how Atlantic Airlines treats its passengers, any of its passengers. He then addressed the cabin at large. Ladies and gentlemen, I've heard and seen everything that transpired here today. I was traveling incognito to experience our service as passengers do. What I witnessed was unacceptable and will be addressed at the highest levels of our organization. Looking directly at Whitfield, he added, Atlantic Airlines was founded in 1963, the same year as the March on Washington. Our first CEO made diversity a cornerstone of our corporate values long before it became fashionable. Our pilots, all our pilots, are selected based on exceptional qualifications, rigorous testing, and demonstrated excellence. Captain Washington isn't an exception to our standards. He exemplifies them. A hush fell over the cabin as passengers processed the unexpected appearance of the CEO and his unambiguous stance. Turning back to Robert, Pearson spoke quietly. Captain, I trust you to handle this flight as you see fit. When we land in New York, I'd appreciate the opportunity to discuss how we can prevent situations like this in the future. I'd welcome that conversation, Sir Robert replied professionally. As Pearson returned to his seat, Robert addressed the cabin once more. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be departing shortly. I'd like to thank those who spoke up. In my experience, both as a pilot and as a black man in America, silence in the face of discrimination is often mistaken for acceptance. Your voices matter. With that, he turned to his daughter. Miss Washington, I believe you'll find seat 2 Amperes available for you. I'll see you after we land in New York. As Robert returned to the cockpit, Zara took her seat, not her originally assigned 4C, but 2 Amperes directly behind first class. The cabin remained unusually quiet as passengers reflected on what they had witnessed and, in some cases, their own roles in allowing discrimination to go unchallenged. Beverly Klein, returning to her economy seat, stopped briefly beside Zara. I should have said something at security, she said quietly. I'm sorry I didn't. Thank you for speaking up now, Zara replied. It's never too late to do the right thing. As the boarding door closed and the aircraft prepared for departure, Zara realized that while the incident had been painful, it had also revealed something important for every Clayton Whitfield in the world. There were people like Beverly, Klein, people who might initially stay silent, but who carried the capacity to find their voice and stand for what was right. That knowledge didn't erase the hurt, but it offered a measure of hope. And as her father's voice came over the intercom to welcome passengers aboard Atlantic Airlines Flight 1382 to New York LaGuardia, Zara felt a surge of pride that transcended the morning's difficulties. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Robert Washington speaking. On behalf of Atlantic Airlines and our entire crew, welcome aboard Flight 1382 to New York LaGuardia. Our flight time today will be approximately 2 hours and 10 minutes. We're currently third in line for departure and should be airborne shortly. His voice was the epitome of professionalism, smooth, confident, and reassuring. No passenger unfamiliar with the pre-flight events would detect anything unusual in his tone. We ask that you please direct your attention to the flight attendants for our safety demonstration. And remember, your safety is our highest priority at Atlantic Airlines. The subtle emphasis on safety wasn't lost on Zara. Safety wasn't just about proper aircraft operation or emergency procedures. It encompassed creating an environment where all passengers could travel without fear or discrimination. As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, Heather Reynolds performed her safety demonstration with mechanical precision, carefully avoiding eye contact with Zara. The other flight attendants who had been briefed about the situation during the boarding delay performed their duties with extra attentiveness, particularly toward Zara and other passengers of color. Clayton Whitfield remained in his seat, engrossed in his laptop, seemingly determined to pretend the incident had never occurred. Whenever Zara glanced in his direction, he deliberately looked away, his posture rigid with unacknowledged shame or lingering resentment, perhaps both. The seating rearrangement had placed Beverly Klein in the aisle seat next to Zara. As the plane accelerated down the runway, Beverly broke the awkward silence between them. "I've never spoken up before," she admitted quietly. "I've seen things, situations like what happened to you at security, and I've always just looked away, told myself it wasn't my business." Zara turned to study Beverly's face. "What made you speak up this time?" Beverly considered the question as the aircraft lifted smoothly into the sky, Atlanta's sprawl gradually diminishing below them. "When I heard that man questioning pilots' qualifications because of their race, something just snapped. Maybe because I knew your father was the captain, so the absurdity was so obvious. Or maybe because I'd already watched you being mistreated once today and felt guilty for not saying anything then." She shook her head. "That's not a very noble answer, is it? It shouldn't take two incidents for someone to find their voice. But you did find it," Zara pointed out. "That's what matters." As the aircraft reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began to settle in for the flight. Conversations throughout the cabin seemed more subdued than usual, with occasional glances toward Zara indicating that the pre-departure events remained on everyone's mind. In the cockpit, Robert and his first officer, James Chen, monitored the aircraft systems with practiced efficiency. Despite the emotional strain of the morning's events, Robert's hands moved steadily over the controls, his focus absolute. This compartmentalization, the ability to separate personal turmoil from professional responsibility, had been essential throughout his career as one of the few black pilots at Atlantic. "Weather looks clear all the way to LaGuardia," James noted, studying the radar display. After a pause, he added, "For what it's worth, I thought you handled that situation impressively, both as a captain and as a father." Robert nodded appreciatively, but kept his focus on the instruments. "When you have kids of your own someday, James, you'll understand. There's no manual for watching your child face discrimination." Back in the cabin, CEO Marcus Pearson was making notes on his tablet, occasionally glancing around at the crew interactions. Despite traveling in first class, he had declined special treatment, insisting on experiencing the flight as a typical passenger would. Now, however, his purpose had evolved from routine service evaluation to something more urgent, understanding how discrimination manifested within his airline's operations and what systematic changes might be needed. Midway through the flight, Heather approached Zara with evident discomfort. "Can I get you anything to drink, Miss Washington?" "Just water, please," Zara replied evenly. As Heather placed the water on Zara's tray table, she hesitated. "I want to apologize for my behavior earlier. It was unprofessional and it was wrong." Zara studied the flight attendant's face, trying to determine whether the apology was sincere or motivated solely by fear for her job. "I've worked for Atlantic for 11 years, Heather continued, her voice low. "And I don't consider myself—" She struggled to find the words. Racist Zara supplied. Heather flinched slightly. "Yes, but my actions today, I can see how they appeared that way." "Not appeared," Zara corrected gently. "Were. When you scrutinize a black passenger's documentation more closely than others, when you suggest they move to economy, despite having a valid first-class boarding pass, those are racist actions, whether you consider yourself racist or not." The flight attendant's eyes filled with tears. "I understand, and I truly am sorry." As Heather moved on to serve other passengers, Beverly leaned toward Zara. "That was gracious of you." Zara shrugged. "My parents taught me that education is sometimes more powerful than punishment. She might actually think differently going forward. Or not. That's up to her." Throughout the remainder of the flight, Zara noticed subtle changes in how passengers interacted. A young white couple who had witnessed everything struck up a conversation with an elderly black man traveling alone, helping him locate the call button when he needed assistance. A businessman who had initially remained silent during the confrontation offered his newspaper to Zara when he finished reading it. Small gestures, perhaps, but they suggested a heightened awareness of the invisible barriers that often divided travelers along racial lines. In the last half hour of the flight, CEO Pearson moved to sit in the empty seat across from Zara. "Miss Washington, I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to ask, beyond the obvious disciplinary measures for the staff involved, what changes you think might prevent situations like yours from happening to other passengers?" Zara considered the question seriously. "It's not about adding another sensitivity training video that employees watch while checking their phones," she replied. "It's about changing the culture so that speaking up against discrimination becomes the norm, not the exception." She gestured toward Beverly. "Miss Klein here witnessed what happened at security but didn't say anything until later. Most people don't, maybe because they don't know what to say, or they're afraid of conflict, or they don't think it's their place." "What would have helped you at that moment?" Pearson asked. "Honestly, just someone saying, 'That's not right,' or 'Why are you searching her bag when you let others through without checking?' Just acknowledgement that what was happening wasn't normal procedure. It was profiling." As the aircraft began its descent into the New York area, Robert's voice came over the intercom again. "Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for arrival." Pearson returned to his seat, still making notes, while passengers stowed their belongings and returned their seats to the upright position. The aircraft banked gracefully over the Manhattan skyline. Robert's handling of the controls so smooth that many passengers paused their conversations to admire the view. Zara felt a complex mixture of emotions as they approached LaGuardia. Pride in her father's skill and professionalism, gratitude for those who had eventually spoken up, lingering hurt from the initial discrimination, and something else, a sense that today's painful experience might somehow contribute to preventing similar incidents for future travelers. As the wheels touched down with barely a bump, one of her father's perfect landings, Zara realized that the journey that had begun with humiliation had transformed into something unexpected. An opportunity for growth, not just for her, but for everyone who had witnessed what happened and been forced to examine their own role in either perpetuating or challenging discrimination. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to LaGuardia Airport. Local time is 10:45 a.m. and the temperature is 72 degrees. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until the aircraft has come to a complete stop and the captain has turned off the seatbelt sign. The flight attendant's announcement was met with the usual rustling of passengers gathering belongings and the soft pings of cell phones being turned on. But there was something different about this arrival. A shared experience that had transformed strangers into witnesses, bystanders into participants. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, Robert executed every maneuver with the precision that had earned him Atlantic's Pilot of the Year award twice in his career. Despite the emotional turbulence of the flight, his landing had been flawless, a silent testament to his professionalism. Zara remained seated after the seatbelt sign dinged off, allowing the rush of deplaning passengers to subside. Beverly Klein lingered as well, retrieving her contact information from her purse. "If you need someone to corroborate your account for the investigation, please call me," Beverly offered, handing Zara her business card. "What happened today wasn't right, and I want to do more than just speak up after the fact next time." Clayton Whitfield had deplaned immediately, avoiding eye contact with everyone, especially Zara. Heather Reynolds stood at the exit, thanking passengers mechanically, her earlier confidence notably diminished. As the cabin emptied, CEO Marcus Pearson approached Zara again. "Miss Washington, with your permission, I'd like to make an announcement before everyone disperses into the terminal." Curious, Zara nodded her agreement. Pearson moved to the front of the cabin where the remaining passengers could see him. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention for a moment? I'm Marcus Pearson, CEO of Atlantic Airlines. Most of you witnessed an unfortunate situation during boarding in Atlanta. I want to be clear, what happened to Miss Washington was unacceptable and does not reflect the values of our airline." Passengers paused, surprised by the impromptu address. Effective immediately, Atlantic Airlines will be implementing a comprehensive review of our training procedures with specific focus on eliminating racial bias in customer interactions. We'll also be instituting a new passenger advocate program designed to ensure all travelers are treated with equal respect and dignity. He turned to Zara. "Miss Washington, on behalf of Atlantic Airlines, I extend our deepest apologies. Your courage in standing up for yourself has highlighted areas where we need to improve, and for that we are grateful." Just then, Robert emerged from the cockpit, still every inch the commanding captain, despite the personal nature of the day's events. The remaining passengers broke into spontaneous applause, not just for his piloting skills, but for his handling of an impossible situation with grace and authority. Robert acknowledged the applause with a modest nod before joining his daughter. Together they deplaned father and daughter, walking side by side through the jetway, their matching dignified posture, a family trait that transcended genetics. 1 month later, Zara sat in the audience at Atlantic Airlines headquarters as her father addressed a room full of pilots, flight attendants, and gate agents. The new diversity training program, named Equal Skies, was being launched with Robert Washington asked to lead the pilot recruitment initiative aimed at bringing more people of color into aviation careers. "Safety has always been our primary concern as airline professionals," Robert told the audience. "But true safety encompasses more than mechanical reliability or emergency procedures. It includes creating an environment where every passenger feels secure, respected, and valued, regardless of their race, gender, religion, or background." In the front row, Harold Thompson nodded vigorously, having become an unexpected champion for the new program after witnessing the incident firsthand. Beside him sat Beverly Klein, who had not only provided testimony for the internal investigation, but had also accepted an invitation to join Atlantic's new passenger advocacy board. Heather Reynolds was notably absent. Following the investigation, she had been suspended and required to complete extensive retraining before possibly returning to flight duties. TSA agent Wade Sullivan faced similar consequences after Beverly's testimony corroborated Zara's account of discriminatory treatment at the security checkpoint. As for Clayton Whitfield, his platinum status had been revoked, and while he hadn't been banned from the airline entirely, a note in the system ensured that he would never again fly on any aircraft captained by Robert Washington. Back at her high school in Atlanta, Zara had been asked to speak to the student body about standing up to discrimination. Initially reluctant to revisit the painful experience, she ultimately agreed after receiving dozens of messages from people who had heard about the incident. Fellow students, family, friends, and even strangers who had been on the flight. "Sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to be silent," she told her classmates. Not with anger or hostility, but with the simple, powerful truth that you deserve the same respect as everyone else. In her college application essay for MIT's aerospace engineering program, Zara wrote about the experience not as a victim narrative, but as a moment that crystallized her understanding of why representation mattered in every field, especially those historically dominated by white men. "My father broke barriers so that I could dream of designing the aircraft he flies," she wrote. "Now it's my turn to ensure the next generation has even fewer barriers to break." On a clear Saturday afternoon, 6 weeks after the flight, Robert took Zara to Atlantic's flight simulator facility. With special permission from the training department, he guided her through the startup procedures of a Boeing 777, the same aircraft type he had flown that fateful day. "I thought you wanted to be an engineer, not a pilot," he teased as she correctly completed the pre-flight checklist. Zara grinned, her hands steady on the controls. "Maybe I can be both. Design them and fly them." As the simulator screen displayed a perfect takeoff from a virtual LaGuardia, Robert watched his daughter with quiet pride. The incident that could have left her bitter had instead strengthened her resolve. The discrimination that could have diminished her had instead expanded her vision of what was possible. "You know," Robert said, as Zara navigated the virtual aircraft toward cruising altitude, "aviation has always been about overcoming gravity, about proving that something everyone thought was impossible is actually just difficult." Zara nodded, understanding the metaphor. "Like overcoming racism." "Exactly," Robert confirmed. "Both require acknowledging the forces working against you, then finding the lift to rise above them anyway." As the simulator showed them soaring above the clouds, father and daughter shared a smile that conveyed, what words couldn't, the knowledge that although the journey was far from over, they were helping to chart a course toward a more equitable future, not just for themselves, but for everyone who would follow in their flight path. This story illuminates several powerful truths about confronting racism in everyday life. First, silence in the face of discrimination is often mistaken for acceptance. When bystanders like Beverly initially remain quiet, they inadvertently reinforce discriminatory behavior. Second, speaking up doesn't require grand gestures. Sometimes a simple, "that's not right," can validate someone's experience and challenge unjust treatment. The story also reveals how racism operates on multiple levels, from explicit comments like Whitfield's to more subtle forms like Heather's questioning of Zara's boarding pass. These microaggressions accumulate, creating an exhausting burden for people of color who must constantly prove their legitimacy. Perhaps most importantly, Zara and Robert's approach demonstrates that addressing discrimination effectively isn't about revenge, but accountability and education. By documenting incidents involving leadership and creating systemic changes, they transformed a painful experience into positive change that benefits everyone. The Washington family motto, "Handle racism with dignity but never silence," offers wisdom for us all. True dignity comes not from suffering in silence, but from standing firmly in your truth while working toward a more just world. What moment in Zara's story resonated most with you? Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you'd spoken up? Comment below with your thoughts or experiences. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Your engagement helps amplify these crucial conversations about racial justice. Thank you for watching, and remember that each of us has the power to create change through our daily choices and courage to speak up. Together we can build a more equitable world where everyone travels through life with dignity and respect.